Anna, thank you for coming on to the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
The last time we saw each other was when the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune held an event for Sebastian Gorka of the Trump National Security Council, where he gave a very upbeat depiction of the way foreign policy is transpiring under the Trump administration. Now we have a hot button issue that the administration is seeking to deal with. Namely, it's back to trying to concoct, if that's the right word, a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. And originally, from what we know, there was a 28-point plan that was either devised by the Russians or by the Russians and Americans meeting in Miami, including Jared Kushner. Now, Secretary of State Rubio has injected himself into the process and met with the Ukrainians in Geneva to offer a slimmed-down plan that we're now hearing is 20 points. Meanwhile, the Russians just launched a heavy bombardment of Ukraine last night, including Kyiv. So tell me, where do you think things stand right now with this 20-point plan?
Well, I think if we go back to how it originally started with the 28-point plan, the way that was plan originally phrased was dead on arrival. It was, in a word, a capitulation to Russia. And it could not have possibly moved forward in that manner. So rather than taking it literally, I viewed it as essentially an opening salvo for a change in negotiations. And that essentially is what we saw proceed in the last several days. One might say we could almost get whiplash from the back and forth that we've seen, the changes in how Trump reacted, and but also the place where we are today, which is a very different plan, one that involved Ukraine and Europeans. The original did not. But the real question is, now that we are in this very different place, well, what does that really leave us? It leaves us with Russia where it was before. Russia is bombarding Ukraine, as you said, and this is how Russia negotiates, that this is a negotiation tactic. So the real question is, what is Russia's position? Is Russia going to accept this plan? And my initial reaction is probably not. Russia, and you can also see how receptive the Russian government was to the original 28-point plan and how quickly they began mocking the European revisions. So are we fundamentally is the needle fundamentally moving towards peace? I'm not sure if it is.
Now, there was an interesting report in the New York Times today, which indicated that the Russians in the past year have occupied about 1% of Ukrainian territory at the cost of 200,000 men. Putin, the article indicates, is convinced that with these small gains that he has eked out over the past year, that he can eventually crack the Ukrainian will to fight and that he can outlast the West and the Ukrainians. Is he wrong or is he delusional?
Well, I certainly think he feels he has time on his side. The fact of the matter is he's not entirely wrong in a sense that when you have a war of attrition, and that's what this is a war of attrition. War of attrition favors the stronger party. And the longer that war drags on, the more it puts the stronger party at an advantage. Having said that, absolutely the Russian economy is under a lot of stress. This war, make no mistake, this is the defining war of our time. It's a global war. We can't pretend it isn't. Who hasn't, at this point, participated in this war, whether it's the Ukrainian battlefield or supporting the Russian war effort or the Ukrainian effort? The idea that the West will get exhausted, that it is simply going to give in, that it's not going to take the time and commit to do what's necessary towards a Ukrainian victory, I think Putin can be forgiven that we may waver. I also think that when you look at how we define a victory. Well, what is our objective? What is the Western objective in this war? We made sure that Ukraine does not lose. But have we ever stated an objective that Ukraine must win? Have we ever stated as an objective that this is that Russia must lose this war? In fact, we're somewhat afraid that Russia might lose this war, you could say, on some level. So, I mean, I don't have all the answers. In my view, there's a high chance that this war will end in some sort of a frozen conflict. That is a potential resolution that I see. But to go back to your original question, I think Putin can be forgiven for believing that he can outlast the West.
Now, we're reading that Russia is suffering from this war.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that they can go for another 12 to 18 months or potentially for years like this?
Well, from what we've seen so far, we found that we, among liberal democracies, no matter how hard we tried, could not isolate Russia globally. And this is the crux of the problem. Russia has been continuously able to find resources outside the liberal free world to sustain this war effort. It is without doubt taking an enormous toll on Russia. But the fact that they're able to continue to find resources and sustain it does tell you quite a bit. Can they sustain it for 12 to 18 months? Yeah, I think they can. Can they sustain it for longer? I'm not sure. But I think a lot depends on how much we're going to keep supporting Ukraine towards that effort.
What do you think is impelling Putin? Do you think that he is trying to resurrect the Russian Empire, or he's simply confining his ambitions to Ukraine, or he wants to crack NATO itself? There's a lot of, controversy around what his overall aims might be.
I think Putin wants a fundamentally different world. He wants to see a fundamentally different world where the entire security architecture, where he has the opportunity to renegotiate that security architecture. The entire post-World War II system set up by the United States, and the post-Cold War system when the Soviet Union lost the Cold War. I think Putin believes that Russia was unfairly disadvantaged, that American hegemony, American leadership, really, is unacceptable and is unfair to Russia. So I think there's a global dimension to this war, first and foremost, and second, there's a European dimension. So it's not just about Ukraine, it's about a global ambition.
Yeah, well, that would certainly be borne out by the drones that have been flying into Poland and into Germany as well, that the Russians are in fact conducting a sub-Rosa war right now against Western Europe, are they not? And Eastern Europe.
Absolutely. They are absolutely, you could call it, I think NATO calls it a shadow war, where Russia is attacking undersea cables, information warfare, cyber operations. It is everything below a threshold of conventional warfare, which tells you again that this war is not just about Ukraine. And if you take that a step further, what does it mean if Ukraine loses this war? Does Russia really stop with Ukraine? My concern is the answer is no. That is why Russia keeps testing NATO airspace, and we've seen this latest round of testing airspace, NATO airspace with Poland and Denmark. Russia has never done it to that extent. And the question is, if you continue to normalize this behavior, if Russia continues to normalize violations of NATO airspace and we don't do anything in response, it slowly erodes confidence in NATO as an alliance. So rather than fighting a war directly, Russia doesn't have the resources nor the will to do that. Instead, it's slowly eroding and undermining us on all these other levels.
So the Cold War ended for the West, essentially on November 9th, 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down. But did it end for Russia?
Well, it certainly did not end for people like Vladimir Putin and the entire circle of intelligence, people like Putin, people who essentially put Putin into power. He's not the only person. He's not one person in that system. It was a group of people. And these people believed that they lost this round, but they lost what was the greatest geopolitical contest of the century. But they will want to have another round where they get to replay that with an alternate ending, and that is exactly what we see playing out right now.
So another sphere in which Russia has re-injected itself is, of course, the Middle East, where you're an expert.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what is your take about Russia's influence in Syria, where it invested so much effort and then saw Bashar al-Assad toppled from power, and that threw its plans into upheaval? Where are we now?
I would say Russia is in a much better position than analysts give it credit for. Yes, Assad fell, and Russia, of course, supported him, but Russia was never kicked out of Syria. Last year when Assad fell, Russia was able to retain a foothold. It was only halfway out of Syria's door, and it used this past year to reconsolidate influence. I would argue that absent greater involvement, Russia is very much poised for a resurgence in Syria in the long term. It might be outlandish to think of that now, but Russia has been able to do remarkably well with the fall of Assad, and I can go in a lot more details if you'd like. But think of it this way first. Russia got to keep its bases in Syria. Now think about it. Russia helped Assad commit war crimes in Syria. They bombed civilians. Putin, extensively, absolutely extensively. And Putin replicated these same tactics on a bigger level in Ukraine. Putin was indicted for war crimes in Ukraine. He is a war criminal, and he is now harboring another war criminal. Rather than facing justice for these crimes, Russia got to keep its military bases. Russia also continues to do business in Syria from an economic perspective. Russia is a primary supplier of Syria's oil, or at least one of the primary suppliers of Syria's oil. It resumed wheat shipments. It prints Syria's currency. American officials had said for years that Russia cannot profit from war crimes in Syria, and yet Russia is already profiting from war crimes in Syria. And now, with greater openness of Syria, Russia, frankly, is poised for an even bigger economic footprint in the country that's going to be very hard to trace because it will be done through third parties, through shell companies. And again, Russia is profiting from war crimes that are committed in Syria. Syria is going to have a very hard time weaning itself off of decades of dependence on Soviet and then Russian military hardware in the absence of other alternatives. So you think about it from a practical perspective. Russia has so many connections to Syria. Also, let's not forget, Russia is the one country that is able to talk to all actors within the country. Damascus, all the myriad of groups such as Syrian Democratic Forces, Christians, Druze, Alawites. Also, external actors outside of Syria, such as Turkey and Israel, who find themselves fundamentally at odds. Russia is one country that can still talk to these parties. So Russia is slowly and quietly positioning itself the same way as it always does, as somebody that can play all sides. And again, Russia is far from a priority right now. It is not the main actor in Syria now, but the way it's positioning itself is it has a lot of potential for a resurgence. The last thing I will say, Syria for Putin was never about Assad. They absolutely chose a side. They absolutely chose to commit to him. But if you look at how Putin interacted with Assad over the years, he clearly did not respect him. He looked down on him. And ultimately, the Russians simply did not see anybody else who could ensure their interests in the country. But this was not fundamentally about Assad, the person, the way it was for Iran. This was fundamentally about having someone in Damascus who could ensure Russia's interests. Assad had done that. In the end, he proved too difficult even for the Russians. We know that from al-Shara himself, that he's never talked about kicking Russia out of Syria. In fact, he emphasized close ties.
It would be dangerous for him, wouldn't it? I mean, they probably would retaliate in some form if he tried to go down that path.
Well, it also, think about also from a pure practical implication. There are a lot of things that Russia could do for Syria that nobody else could do. Russia bombed HTS and Shara himself, and yet he was able to put that aside, take a very pragmatic stance, and simply chose to make a deal with him.
What is your take on al-Shara? I mean, he met with Trump. Trump has been very receptive, much to the surprise of some of his followers and detractors. He's been pretty transactional as regards Syria. Do you think is Trump doing the right thing?
Well, I think he's trying to do the right thing in terms of recognizing that the importance of Syria, but there are many questions about what is our Syria policy and where is it on our list of priorities. Um, if you look at the 5-point plan that the administration has put forward in terms of requirements to fulfill for Syria, kicking Russia out is not one of them. And the real question is Syria going to be a priority for the Trump administration? Are we going to focus on getting it right? I'm not convinced that we are. And that also creates an opening for Russia down the road.
Why do you think it's not a priority?
Well, the priority seems to be, there seems to be other issues across the Middle East, and that is the Gaza war, Iran, and specifically the Iranian nuclear program. We simply don't have a lot of people in the U.S. government dedicated to Syria, and I think that in and of itself, the lack of enough people focused on Syria is another example of being fairly low on the list of priorities.
To what extent is Iran enmeshed in Syria, which was a key country for it before the toppling of Assad?
Iran right now also is in a difficult spot. Iran has been kicked out, but the question is, can Iran slowly find its way back in, especially potentially with the help of the Russians? And that is not an outlandish scenario down the road.
To what degree have the events in Syria impinged upon Hezbollah's ability to maintain its power in Lebanon?
Yeah, I think that the combination of these cascading effect of these events that we saw since October 7th with the weakening of Hezbollah and Iran itself across the region, I think played an important role in what brings us to the present. But what's important to know now, we're in this different reality. We're still seeing Hezbollah slowly reconstituting itself. The Iranian regime has not collapsed. And what my worry is that maybe we won the battle, like we as a collective West of liberal democracies, we may have won the battle, but not the war.
So Iran is apparently experiencing severe difficulties with water, with calls being issued now to potentially evacuate Tehran itself.
Well, I don't know what that, I don't know where that leaves us. I don't know how to place that into a larger context. Obviously, things are not going well, but
Yeah.
but we've seen that before.
Now,
So,
you raised an interesting question, too, that's frequently forgotten, which is that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has cultivated close ties with the Kremlin in the past. I think that became somewhat more attenuated after October 7th because the Kremlin was not very friendly to Israel at that point. What do you think about Russian-Israeli relations?
yeah, and you're absolutely right. The Kremlin's reaction to October 7th showed with the starkest clarity where Putin's true allegiance lied, with his loyalty lied. I want to emphasize that was always the case. This was not a real shift. It was just it's just that it now became, Putin made it more obvious that that's where he had been all along. But I think what's also interesting is that neither Russia nor Israel seek a bilateral crisis. They haven't fundamentally broken relations. Israel has not done more to support the Ukraine war effort, for example. So fundamentally, on some level, maybe there was a cooling in terms of how Russia and Israel interacted. But fundamentally, I'm not sure if anything has really changed from a substantive level.
As a final question, let's go broad. President Trump is approaching 1 year in office, January 20th. It's still, for all the turbulence and activity that we've seen in the past year, it's still a fairly young administration. How would you assess the administration's record over the past year towards the Middle East?
Well, I think we've seen some short-term gains. I think the question is there going to be is there going to be a long-term commitment, and or is this going to be a one-off so that we can turn away and focus on other priorities?
And you're thinking specifically about the Gaza peace plan?
Yes.
Well, let's ask as a final question. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the prospects in the Gaza Strip for an actual peace? Or do you think it's going to devolve again into maybe not an all-out attack as Israel, but just a state of constant what they call low-intensity warfare?
I lean more towards a state of low intensity warfare. I'm not optimistic that we'll see a final resolution, but I'd love to be proven wrong.
I had the feeling you were going to say that. I usually try to end on an upbeat note, but realism above all. Thank you.
Thank you.